It's dark, and you're alone. Your only dream is for a hand just to reach out and bring you comfort. You wish to find your sanctuary, your refuge, your home. But this is not a dream. This is cold, this is angry, and you have no hope. Every hand, every face that you turn to for as far as you can see offers you nothing but pain. There's no choir bells, there's no cavalry, just a bunch of people smiling and having fun while you are beaten, strung up, and burned alive. You raise your hand one last time and somebody beats it down. And then someone takes your picture. Your last moment on this earth. And it's a nightmare. This was and is America's nightmare.
For the past 20 years, he's found horrifying pictures in the family albums of ordinary Southern homes. Many are postcards that were mass-produced as souvenirs.
Some of these images were printed in the tens of thousands and sold for a dime or $1 a piece. Some of the postcards tell you where to write and the discounts you'll get if you buy 1, 10, or 100. They were sold in drugstores and pharmacies. They were sold on the street. I purchased a photograph from a woman. The photographer sold them door to door. Her mother bought the image for $2. A murder that is of particular interest to me was of a 17-year-old boy by the name of Jess Washington in Waco, Texas, in 1916. He was seriously mentally challenged. The wife of the farmer that he worked for was found dead. He was arrested. He was brought to trial. The trial took from 10 until 12. And when the jury came back at noon and found him guilty, someone in the courtroom, and it would have been anyone in the courtroom, screamed out, "Get that nigger." And one of the worst and cruelest treatments of a human being began. Jess was kicked down out of the courthouse, down the back steps where a crowd of several hundred was waiting for him. They put a chain on his neck. There were 16,000 people crowding the street to watch this boy be tortured. Jess was tied to the chain over a branch of a tree. The fire was started. They raised Jess from the fire up into the air so that the crowd could see him. There were cheers, like at a football game, cheering the torturers on. When Jess tried to climb up the chains, hand by hand, they cut his fingers off one by one so that all he could do was slap at the chain. They lowered him back down in the fire. A man came up and castrated him. Another man kept a pole so that he couldn't crawl out of the fire. And time and again, they pulled him up to keep him from dying so that the crowd could be satisfied. Until he finally died.
It's still here. It's still affecting us. And until we come to terms with it, until we started speaking out against it, until people start opening their eyes to what is going on, it will continue for another 50, 60 years.
When we talk about lynching, we are looking at a history of violence that spans back in this country almost to the founding of the Republic. It's not a Southern phenomenon, it's an American phenomenon. It happened both North and South.
People being tarred and feathered, run out of town, all of those were the beginnings of the lynching in the United States.
As we move through the 19th century, lynching became more of a phenomenon because Americans in Cincinnati, Americans in Indiana, Americans all over this country were afraid of competition from blacks economically, politically, and socially.
What starts to happen is the white South starts to take back control. And this is when you start to see the spectacle start to occur in the lynching era.
Pastoral scene of the gas.
People understood that if you did violence to people of African descent, there would be no repercussions from the courts, and consequently the lynching became more and more organized.
People would advertise these in newspapers, and train stations would sell tickets at cheaper prices so people can come in from other towns to watch these events.
My first encounter with the subject, I received the words of my father. He grew up in the Deep South in Canton, Mississippi, and as a child he saw men hanging from the trees. He had saw men who had been hung. And he told me those stories and how life was for him growing up in Mississippi.
A lot of these people grew up hand in hand or neighbor to neighbor with the people who ended up lynching them. These were not strangers to an area most of the time. They were your neighbors.
I think if you were lynched, you died before they broke your neck.
There was certainly a ritual that would happen, the first aspect being the accusation, where a person would be accused of a crime. Usually it would be murder or rape. Then there would be the recruitment process, again, where you would have newspaper articles encouraging the citizens, the upstanding citizens, to join together. Then you would have the hunt, often reminiscent of escaped slaves. And then you would have the performance, that torture aspect that would usually last for a number of hours. And finally, the souvenir stage.
He's a veteran investigator, and he was talking to this gentleman, basically getting his side of the story about how this gentleman's mother was left to die because she was African American, and the person who was supposed to be working on her wouldn't give her CPR because of that. So he's getting all of this information and getting the full story from him, and then all of a sudden starts asking him a lot of crazy questions. This dude, Sewell, because you don't know him, so we don't care about his first name.
William.
Oh, thank you. He says, the first thing he said to the guy is, "Have you ever been in a penitentiary?" To which Sean Mullins said, "I find that very insulting, actually." Then the guy launched into a story about how they used to, he has ancestors from that part of town that were part of a lynch mob, and they lynched a young black man, and they skinned him. And he was very proud to tell this man that they each took pieces of skin off of the man's back and used it as a knife sharpener strap. And I don't know how you don't take that as some kind of threat, some kind of emotional, physical, any kind of threat. But he certainly did. Yes.
I would be too confused to be threatened.
Well, but there's a punchline, because when they asked Sewell about this, he said he insisted to the station that he was just trying to convince Mullins and the others in the meeting that he understood what racism was like.
I think the reason to talk about events like this and to remember the past is so we can look back and educate young people today, so events like this don't happen again today. Most people think the lynching era ended. It actually has not.
In '84, they found my brother hung. My brother spoke about things that were different in how people were treated of color. And I think that somebody lynched him. There were no investigations. We couldn't even get another person to do the autopsy.
It was August 1997. And I was in Independence at the time. My brother called me and asked if I had heard anything about GP. He was carried outside, doused with gasoline, and I don't recall which came first, the beheading or the burning. But his head was found in one place and his body was found in another. I guess there's going to always be this bubbling under the surface of what happened there, but we learn stuff every day.
What was it like to be lynched? I can't tell you, but I can tell you what it's like to be raised to understand that your life has no value.
I think America still struggles with the value of the life of those descendants of Africans.
It's time for us to open up. It's time for us to look at what we're doing to each other.
So there's this automatic notion of inferiority. I think nobody can break that cycle but us. People of African descent have to tell the truth about the value of our lives, about the sanctity of our being, and that only we can control what happens to us going forward. That's why we need to remember.
Sanctuary, I think, where during the period when there was a lot of lynching, you had people going out en masse, whole thousands of people going out to see the lynching.
We were taught at an early age certain things that we could do, could not do, such as you were never to make eye contact while walking down the street with a white person. If you were approaching one of them on the sidewalk, you stepped aside and they...
Glenn Birkin, publisher of QCD Metro, partnered with the Levine Museum of the New South to sponsor a viewing and open forum discussion of the exhibit. Participants were challenged to process the visual text through their individual filters. Because you talk about the Holocaust, you talk about the Jewish community, but as a country, as a nation, there has been some sense of accountability in terms of their participation, in terms of helping that community heal. I think what makes it more insidious for us is that there's really not been a sense of community accountability, a sense of let's take ownership of this travesty.
This photo by Lawrence Beetler of the lynching of Thomas Shipp and Abraham Smith on August 7th, 1930. These two young men were charged with the robbery and murder of a white man and the rape of his girlfriend. This crowd broke into the jail with sledgehammers and beat these two men and lynched them without due process of law. Where were the police? You might find them here in the crowd helping the people hang these men. Look at the man here in front. He looks like he might be middle or even upper class. He has a collar on his pristine white shirt. His face is set against these men in anger. We can wonder if he might feel the same way if it was a white man being deprived of his rights, or even how he might feel if it were he himself dangling from the tree. Look again at the men hanging from the tree. This photo inspired a man named Abel Marable to write a poem called Strange Fruit. It spoke of what people didn't want to hear or even remember. that of the hatred and rage set off by one alleged crime because of racial tensions among people who were different. The poem speaks for itself. Southern trees bear strange fruit, blood on the leaves and blood at the root. Black bodies swinging in the southern breeze, strange fruit hanging from the poplar trees. Pastoral scene of the gallant South, the bulging eyes and the twisted mouth. Scent of magnolias sweet and fresh, then the sudden smell of burning flesh. Here is fruit for the crows to pluck, for the rain to gather, for the wind to suck, for the sun to rot, for the trees to drop. Here's a strange and bitter crop.